The finance minister has had conversations directly with the banks about credit card interest rates. We recognize that they are a significant challenge for many Canadians at this point. That is why we are encouraging them to take action to alleviate the burden for Canadians. At the same time as we are looking on our end at making credit more available and less expensive for Canadians to be able to make it through the next few months.
Welcome back to Power and Politics, and a big welcome to our viewers joining us on their local station in Newfoundland and Labrador. The federal government is asking banks and credit card companies to do their part to help Canadians suffering through the COVID-19 crisis. The Prime Minister says they should lower their interest rates. That's after the feds passed their $107 billion aid package through Parliament yesterday. It included what's known as the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit, which is on track to deliver $2,000 a month for 4 months to Canadians who have lost their jobs or their income. Once the online application system starts up next month, the government says people can expect payment within 10 days. But is that timeline feasible? Joining us now is Professor Jennifer Robson. She is with Political Management Department at Carleton University. She also served on an advisory panel to the Minister of Finance in 2016. Hi, Professor Robson. Great to have you with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you, if you don't mind, in the simplest terms, break down what this program is compared to EI?
For sure. So this is, your viewers may have heard that there were going to be two emergency benefits. This is those two benefits rolled into one. So when the application portal opens with the Canada Revenue Agency, if you have lost your ability to earn income, whether that's gig work or regular work or you're self-employed, so maybe you haven't necessarily lost your job, but you're on an unpaid leave. This is a new, simple benefit. It will be paid, like you said, $2,000 per month. And so it'll be available through the Canada Revenue Agency. It'll be paid on the basis of certain eligibility criteria. We can walk through those if that would be helpful for your viewers. But the idea is that really this is about an emergency cash transfer to a lot of people who otherwise either wouldn't be covered by EI at all, or we're going to have to wait a very long time given the backlog of EI claims.
Can you let me know specifically, I think when we're talking about who's eligible, in particular, who is eligible who would normally not be for EI in this instance?
Right. So the big one, of course, is anybody who is a self-employed worker. Anybody who had, for example, been doing contract work where they didn't necessarily have a traditional employer-employee relationship and wouldn't necessarily have been paying into the EI system. I think the other thing that's really important to know about the new emergency benefit is that you don't necessarily have to be ill or quarantined the way that people were perceiving EI sickness benefits. You don't necessarily have to be in a position of terribly, the compassionate care benefit where you're giving care to somebody who is in a critical illness. And unlike EI, you don't have to lose your job. So if you're furloughed, right, if your employer is saying, we don't have work for you right now, we want to hang on to you, but please listen to the advice of public health, please stay home. Those are some of the circumstances that actually this new CERB, they're calling it, the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit, those people will be helped.
Okay, again on the question of who will be helped, this is also something that I keep getting a lot of, and that is, does your income have to basically be nothing? And I ask because what has happened in this instance is that, for example, a restaurant will close because none of them are allowed to be open in most provinces except for takeout. So they've substantially lost their income. So people that work in the restaurant have very minimal income, hardly enough to get by, but they don't have zero. Is it true that they would not qualify for this at all?
That's a great question. So the answer, of course, is for people who have now got zero income, the legislation is pretty clear, they will qualify. So if you have zero income or it says do not have income for 14 days, they will qualify. For people who might be working, but where the employers are having a hard time keeping up with payroll, there is the wage subsidy program that was previously announced that is still available. The gray area is, what do we mean by substantially no income for 14 days? And folks will know that with EI, that usually kicks in, at least for special benefits, if your regular earnings have fallen to about 40% or less of what they usually are. So I think we need to get some clarity from the government on that question about whether, no income really means zero for those 14 days, or whether it might mean something more like a significant and substantial reduction in your income and what that might mean.
Okay, so we don't know that yet at this point.
I would say we don't have the full information. I mean, looking at the legislation, it's pretty clear in the cases of people who have no income. And it's pretty clear in the cases of people who are still at full income. It's the question of what happens to those folks in between, and how is CRA going to be making those determinations and those calls.
I've also received a lot of questions from students who are wondering if they fit into this at all because, for example, they didn't have a job, but they had one coming up. And now that job has been eliminated. We're heading into the end of the term, and they were, depending on that income in order to either go back to school or survive through the summer. Does anything here apply to them?
So the legislation that created this new benefit actually doesn't talk at all about students, right? It does say anybody 15 years of age or up who meets the other eligibility criteria, namely that they had at least $5,000 in work income, either through regular work or through self-employment, in the last year or the last 12 months before they apply. Now, that will actually cover a lot of students because about half of all Canadian students, even the full-time ones, are working to some degree. I think what we need is clarity around during the CERB period, which is going to be from retroactive to March 15 through to October 3rd, how do students establish their eligibility for jobs that they will not now be holding? So I think that's a great question. I understand the concerns of students. I imagine that there will be more information coming soon.
Okay, let me broaden it out a bit. You mentioned the wage subsidy. Can you explain a bit so what the government has proposed is 10% of wages can be subsidized up to 3 months, I think it is, up to $25,000 per employer. Can you explain in sort of kind of layman's terms what that means?
So what that means is if you're an employer and you are still, if you're still able to keep your staff on payroll, where you're continuing to pay them some of their regular wages, this is a program that lets, and it's really targeted to more small enterprises, right? This is a program that lets employers apply for a subsidy from the federal government, who will then pick up a tab, or part of the tab, up to that 10% cap of those payroll costs. And it's one of the tools in the toolbox. Right now, what we really need to focus on is making sure that enough Canadians have income to make ends meet, to meet their essential needs, but at the same time trying to preserve and protect as many jobs and that relationship between employers and employees. So the CERB can kick in even if you haven't been fired, right? But if your employer has said, I'm sorry, I don't have work for you and I can't pay you, but I don't want to lose you, that's where the new benefit can kick in. And then the wage subsidy can help more employers hopefully keep people on some form of the payroll.
What is sort of your analysis at this point of the argument being put forth by a lot of organizations that represent small business saying that wage subsidy needs to be higher?
So I would say actually it's important to remember that the new emergency benefit is in itself a form of a wage subsidy, right? If you have said to your employees, I'm sorry, I have to furlough you, I can't pay you, this is in fact actually a form of wage subsidy. The issue of the 10% for those workers and those businesses who are still operating, and I want to be clear that given the number of shutdowns and the range of shutdowns, it's I think a question of how many of those would be affected. I can completely understand the questions from small business and the concern from small business that 10% feels low, perhaps that the ceiling needs to be re-examined, and I don't have a magic answer for what the right numbers are, but I can appreciate those considerations and concerns from where they're coming from.
What about you talk about sort of the bulk of Canadians right now who are worried about the upcoming bills, worried about mortgages, worried about rent. The Prime Minister said something today, and we have also received a lot of questions from people who are worried about mortgage deferrals or just the idea of deferrals as a whole, trying to get through to banks. There's some messages they've received that they're going to pay interest on the interest that they don't pay over the next however many months. What is your take on sort of the ability, what kind of ability does the government have to push the banks on this stuff?
Well, there is actually legislation in place in terms of the Canadian Financial Consumer Protection Code. So I think the federal government actually does have tools. Given the kind of economic climate that we're in right now, I imagine also that financial institutions are very interested in having cooperation from the federal government in terms of maintaining liquidity and stability within the financial sector. And so I think there's a reciprocal obligation by those banks to live up to the public commitments that they've made. And I would be strongly encouraging consumers to exercise the rights that they have been told they have. And I really sincerely hope that federal regulators who are in charge of financial services sector policy are keeping a close watch, are paying attention to consumer concerns, and that those, are factored in terms of some of the considerations with regards to financial sector policy in the next little while.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for such valuable information and insights. I know our viewers are going to really appreciate it, and I appreciate it as well. Thanks, Professor Robson.
Thank you.
Jennifer Robson of Carleton University. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.